You have never, not once in your entire life, experienced direct proof that another human being is conscious. Think about that. Every conversation you have ever had, every moment of eye contact, every whispered confession from someone you love, all of it arrived through your nervous system, was decoded by your brain, and was assembled into an experience that existed only inside your own skull. You have never stepped outside of yourself. You have never touched another person's awareness the way you touch their hand. The laughter of your closest friend, the tears of a stranger, the warmth of someone sleeping beside you, all of it is a reconstruction, an interpretation, a model your brain built from electrical signals, then chose to trust. And tonight, we are going to sit with that idea, not to frighten you, not to unravel the world, but to follow a thread that has quietly fascinated philosophers, neuroscientists, and late-night thinkers for centuries. If you enjoy this kind of slow, curious exploration, consider staying with us, subscribing if it feels right. What follows is a journey into one of the deepest questions a mind can ask. Not whether the universe is real, not whether time has an end, but something closer, something you carry with you everywhere and never examine. Are the people around you truly there, or has your mind, brilliant, lonely, endlessly creative, been dreaming them into existence all along? Let's find out, gently, together, or perhaps alone. Close your eyes for a moment and picture a red apple sitting on a white table. You can probably see it, the curve of the skin, maybe a faint shine, the stem tilted slightly. Now, open your eyes. The room around you seems different from that apple, doesn't it? More solid, more real, more out there rather than in here. But here is something neuroscience has slowly uncovered over the last few decades. Something that still unsettles researchers who spend their careers studying it. The brain doesn't work the way most people assume. It doesn't sit passively inside your skull, waiting for the world to send in images and sounds and textures like a camera recording whatever falls in front of it. Instead, your brain is doing something far more active. It is generating reality continuously from the inside out. There's a framework in neuroscience sometimes called predictive processing. The basic idea is that your brain maintains an internal model, a kind of rough draft of what the world should look like at any given moment. Before light hits your retina, before sound vibrates your eardrum, the brain has already made a guess about what's coming next. Perception in this view isn't reception, it's prediction. What your eyes actually send the brain are mostly corrections, tiny error signals, differences between what the brain expected and what arrived, and the brain updates its model slightly and presents you with the revised version. That revised version is what you call seeing, what you call hearing, what you call the room you're sitting in right now. A neuroscientist named Anil Seth has described this as a kind of controlled hallucination. Not hallucination in the sense of seeing things that aren't there, but hallucination in the sense that what you do see is always, to some degree, a construction, a best guess, a story the brain tells itself about what's probably on the other side of your skull. And here is where it gets quietly strange. If the world you perceive is already partly imagined, if your brain is always filling in, smoothing over, predicting ahead, then the line between what's real and what's generated becomes much blurrier than it seems. You look at a chair and feel certain it's there, but a large portion of that certainty was manufactured before the light from the chair ever reached you. Now, hold that thought, because if the brain does this with objects, with chairs and walls and skies, what does it do with something far more complex? What does it do with people? There is a particular kind of magic in meeting someone's eyes across a room. Something shifts. You feel, in some wordless way, that another mind is looking back at you. Not just a body, not just a face, but a someone, an inner world behind those pupils as vivid and private as your own. It feels automatic, instant, like recognizing gravity. But that feeling, that immediate sense of another consciousness gazing back, is not a direct perception. It's something your brain builds. When you look at another person and try to understand what they're thinking or feeling, a specific constellation of brain regions activates. The temporoparietal junction, a small area near the boundary, where your temporal and parietal lobes meet, lights up. So does the medial prefrontal cortex, the strip of brain tissue running along the inner surface of your frontal lobe. Together, these regions are involved in what researchers call mentalizing, the process of constructing a model of someone else's mental state. And the key word there is model, not a direct reading, not a transmission, a simulation. Your brain takes what it can see, a facial expression, a gesture, a tone of voice, and combines it with what it already knows, or thinks it knows, about that person, their history, their patterns, what you assume someone like them might be feeling. And from all of that, it assembles a working theory of their inner life, an internal character, a puppet made of memory, expectation, and inference, performing inside the theater of yore. And this character feels real. It feels like them. When a friend tells you something painful, you feel you are understanding their pain. When someone laughs at your joke, you believe you've touched their joy, but you haven't, not directly. What you've touched is your brain's version of their joy, a version rendered entirely from your own neural hardware, colored by your own experiences, shaped by your own emotional palette. It's a little like reading a novel. When you read a character's dialogue, you hear a voice in your mind. It feels like the character is speaking, but the voice is yours. The emotions you feel for that character are generated by your own brain, using your own memories of what sadness or delight feel like. The people in your life might the same thing be happening. Not that they don't exist, but that your experience of their inner world has always and only been a portrait your brain painted from the outside in. There is no cable connecting your consciousness to theirs. There never has been. There is only your brain in its dark room sculpting the idea of another mind out of light, sound, and guesswork. Watch someone reach for a glass of water. Just watch. Don't move yourself. Something will happen in your brain that you won't notice, something quiet and automatic. Certain neurons in your premotor cortex, the region that plans physical actions, will fire. Not because you're reaching for anything, but because you're watching someone else reach. These cells are called mirror neurons, and they were discovered somewhat by accident in the early 1990s, when researchers studying macaque monkeys noticed that some neurons fired identically, whether the monkey grabbed a peanut or simply watched a researcher grab one. The neuron didn't distinguish between doing and observing. It treated both as the same event. In humans, the mirror system appears to be even more extensive. It responds not only to observed actions, but in some studies, to observed emotions. When you see someone smile, regions associated with your own smiling activate faintly. When you watch someone receive a painful injection, your anterior insula, a part of the brain deeply involved in the felt sense of your own body, responds as if the needle were approaching your skin. This is often cited as the neural basis of empathy, the idea that we literally share other people's feelings, that their joy echoes in our tissue, that we are, in some neurological sense, connected. But here's the quieter, less comfortable reading. What if mirror neurons don't connect you to another person's experience at all? What if they simply allow your brain to simulate that experience internally, using its own resources? The pain you feel when watching someone get hurt, it doesn't come from them. It originates in your own insula, your own singular cortex, your own body map. You aren't feeling their pain. You're feeling your brain's private reenactment of what pain might feel like in that situation, and you can't tell the difference. That's the strange part. The simulation is so seamless, so emotionally convincing, that it feels like a bridge between two minds. But it might be more like a one-way projection, your brain performing someone else's experience on its own internal stage, with no way to verify whether the original performance matches. Empathy in this light is extraordinary, but it's also deeply solitary. A hall of mirrors in which every reflection is your own face wearing someone else's expression. And if the feeling of emotional connection to others is something your brain manufactures internally, if it has always been a private production, then the line between genuine connection and elaborate self-referencing becomes harder to draw than most of us ever pause to consider. A newborn baby does not know that other minds exist. This sounds obvious when you say it plainly, but consider what it actually means. For the first weeks and months of a human life, the universe contains only one perspective, one hunger, one warmth, one awareness that hasn't yet learned to imagine another. The world of the newborn isn't solipsistic by choice, it's solipsistic by default. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, something begins to change. Around 2 months old, babies start to show a preference for faces, not objects, not patterns, but faces specifically. Something in the architecture of the infant brain is drawn toward the particular arrangement of eyes, nose, and mouth, as though evolution built in a magnet that says, "This is important. Look here." By around 9 months, a more remarkable behavior appears. The infant begins to follow another person's gaze. If you look toward a corner of the room, a 9-month-old will turn and look, too. This sounds simple, but it represents something philosophically enormous. The baby is not just seeing your eyes. The baby is beginning to understand that your eyes are directed at something, that you have attention, that your mind is pointed somewhere. This is the earliest flicker of what developmental psychologists call theory of mind, the ability to attribute mental states to other beings, to understand that other people have beliefs, desires, and perspectives that may differ from your own. But it doesn't arrive all at once. It builds in stages unevenly over years. One of the most famous tests in developmental psychology is the false belief task. A child watches a puppet place a marble in a basket and leave the room. While the puppet is gone, the marble is moved to a box. The question, where will the puppet look for the marble when it returns? Children under 4 typically say the box because they know the marble ice there and they can't yet separate their own knowledge from someone else's. After roughly age 4, most children answer correctly. The puppet will look in the basket because the puppet doesn't know the marble was moved. That shift, understanding that someone else's mind can contain a different picture of reality than yours, is not something you're born with. It's something the brain constructs over years of social exposure, a skill assembled from thousands of interactions, facial expressions, corrections, and misunderstandings. And this raises a quiet but profound question. If the sense that other people have minds is something the brain learns to produce, a developmental achievement, not a given, then how confident should you be that it reflects something real, rather than something the brain became very good at generating? There is a network of brain regions that becomes most active when you are doing nothing at all, not solving a problem, not focusing on a task, not engaging with anything external, just resting, daydreaming, drifting. It's called the default mode network, and for a long time, neuroscientists didn't pay it much attention. It seemed like neural idling, the brain spinning its wheels with no load. But over the past 2 decades, researchers revealed something far more interesting. The default mode network isn't doing nothing. It's doing something very specific. It's imagining. It imagines the future, what might happen tomorrow, next week, next year. It revisits the past, replaying conversations, re-experiencing emotions, rewriting what you wish you'd said. And crucially, it imagines other people, what they might be thinking, how they might react, what they meant when they said what they said. The medial prefrontal cortex, a core hub of this network, activates both when you think about yourself and when you think about others. The same region, the same circuitry. Your inner narrative about who you are and your inner model of who they are run on overlapping hardware. This is worth sitting with. The voice inside your head that tells you what your friend is probably feeling right now uses the same neural machinery as the voice that tells you who you are. The author of your identity and the author of other people's imagined identities appear to be the same system. And this network doesn't wait for you to actively decide to think about someone. It runs continuously in the background, like a program you never opened, but that's always using memory. When your mind wanders during a boring meeting, it often wanders to people. When you lie in bed at night, it tends to drift towards social scenarios. The default mode network treats the social world as its primary material, generating and revising characters, scenes, and emotional plots without any conscious instruction from you. Some researchers have suggested this network is the brain's storytelling engine, the part of you that knits raw experience into a coherent narrative with a cast of characters, a protagonist, and an ongoing sense of meaning. Without it, studies suggest the world would feel like a series of disconnected moments, no autobiography, no social context, no felt sense of other minds. So, here is the question that surfaces when you look at this closely. If the network that generates your sense of self also generates your sense of others, if both are products of the same daydreaming engine, running on the same tissue, using the same patterns of activation, then how clearly can you distinguish between the two? How do you know where you end and they begin, if both are stories being told by the same narrator? Tonight, at some point, you will fall asleep, and your brain will do something remarkable. Without any input from the outside world, no light through your eyelids, no meaningful sound, no touch, it will build an entire reality from scratch, a landscape, a room, a crowd of people with faces, voices, and intentions. Some of them will be strangers you have never met. Some will be people you know, acting in ways that surprise you, or move you, or frighten you. And in the moment, none of it will feel invented. It will feel real. During REM sleep, the phase most associated with vivid dreaming, the brain enters a state that is, in many respects, shockingly similar to waking consciousness. The visual cortex becomes active. You see things that aren't there. The amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, is highly engaged. You feel things intensely. The hippocampus shuffles fragments of memory into novel combinations. You experience events that never happened. But there's one crucial difference. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, a region associated with logical reasoning, critical thinking, and self-monitoring, goes largely quiet. This is the part of the brain that normally asks, wait, does this make sense? Is this really happening? In dreams, that question isn't asked, and so the dream goes unchallenged. The fabricated people feel as real as anyone you met today. Now, consider this carefully. If the brain can generate fully convincing people, people who speak, emote, argue, and embrace you without any external stimulus, using only its own resources, then the machinery for creating the experience of other minds exists entirely within your skull. It doesn't require real people to activate. It can run the simulation alone. During waking hours, this machinery is supplemented by sensory input, real light, real sound, real faces. But the core process, the process of generating the felt experience of another conscious being, is the same process that runs in your dreams. The difference between the people in your dream and the people in your waking life, from your brain's perspective, is not that one is fabricated and the other is not. It's the one version receives more error correction from the senses. Peel away the sensory correction, and what remains is the same engine, the same theater, the same audience of one. Watching characters that the brain constructed and believing, because it has no other option, that they are real. The boundary between dreaming someone and perceiving someone might be thinner than you've ever allowed yourself to consider. And each night, as you drift off, you cross that boundary without noticing, without asking, without ever finding the seam. In the winter of 1641, a French mathematician sat in a warm room in the Netherlands, close to a fire, and decided to dismantle everything he believed, not for destruction's sake, but because he wanted to find something, anything, that could survive total doubt. René Descartes had spent years watching the intellectual certainties of his era crumble. Trusted theories turned out to be wrong. The senses, he noticed, sometimes lied. A stick looked bent in water. Distant towers appeared round when they were actually square. If the senses could be mistaken about small things, he wondered, could they be mistaken about everything? And so he asked a question that still hasn't been fully answered nearly 4 centuries later. What if all of this, the room, the fire, the body he felt sitting in the chair, were a dream? Not a metaphorical dream, not a poetic suggestion, an actual dream, indistinguishable from waking life, conjured by his own sleeping mind, or planted by some deceiving force he couldn't detect. He couldn't rule it out. That was the unsettling part. There was no test he could perform, no sensation he could examine that would conclusively prove he was awake rather than dreaming. Every piece of evidence he might offer, the solidity of the table, the heat of the fire, the sound of his own voice, could in principle be fabricated by a sufficiently convincing dream. So Descartes kept going. He stripped away layer after layer. The external world may be illusory, his own body possibly a phantom. Other people, perhaps projections, mathematics. Even that could be corrupted if some powerful deceiver were feeding him false certainties. And then he hit bedrock. One thing resisted, no matter how deeply he doubted. The act of doubting itself could not be an illusion because doubting is a form of thinking. And thinking requires a thinker, cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. It's perhaps the most famous sentence in the history of philosophy. And what many people miss is what it actually proved and what it didn't. It proved that you exist as a thinking thing, but it proved nothing about anyone else. Descartes' method established one island of certainty in a sea of doubt, your own consciousness. Everything beyond it, the world, the stars, the people you love, remained in the strictest logical sense unverified. He didn't stay in that position. Descartes rebuilt his confidence in the external world through arguments that most later philosophers found unconvincing. But the door he opened, the possibility that your mind might be alone with its own inventions, never fully closed. It remains open tonight. Right now, as you listen, there's a particular kind of loneliness buried inside a question most people will never think to ask. You sit across from someone at dinner. They tell you about their day, a frustrating meeting, a beautiful sunset they saw on the drive home, a joke their child told them that made milk come out of their nose. You laugh, you nod. You feel that you understand, but do you? Not whether you understand the words, you do. Not whether you can picture what they describe, you can, but whether you have any access, any at all, to the actual experience happening inside their skull, the felt quality of their frustration, the specific shade of orange their sunset contained, the exact burst of joy that made them laugh. This is what philosophers call the problem of other minds, and it's more stubborn than it appears. The difficulty is structural, not emotional. You can observe another person's behavior, their words, their expressions, their reactions. You can measure their brain activity, map their neural firing patterns, record every physiological response, but none of that is the same as being them. None of it gives you their first-person experience. You are always and permanently on the outside. The usual response is to argue by analogy. I have a mind. Other people have bodies similar to mine, behave similarly, and their brains have the same structure. So, probably they have minds too. This is reasonable. Most people find it convincing. But as a logical argument, it has a weakness that centuries of philosophy have failed to patch. Analogy is not proof. If you owned the only clock in the world and noticed it moved in sync with the sun, you might reasonably conclude the two were connected, but you'd be making an inference, not a demonstration, and inferences can be wrong. John Stuart Mill explored this in the 19th century. Bertrand Russell wrestled with it. Contemporary philosophers still do. The problem has not been resolved. It has been, at best, lived with. We operate as though other minds exist because to do otherwise would make social life impossible. But the philosophical gap between as though and certainly has never been closed, and here is what makes this relevant tonight. As you lie still and listen, every person you have ever trusted, every friend whose advice changed your direction, every lover whose gaze made you feel seen, you believed they were conscious. You believed they had an interior, but that belief was based on inference, pattern matching, and a feeling of connection that originated entirely inside your own nervous system. The door to another person's experience remains shut. You can knock. You can press your ear against it. You can hear muffled sounds and form your best interpretation, but you cannot walk through. Imagine your closest friend. Picture them exactly as they are. Every habit, every expression, every word they'd say in a given situation. Now, imagine a version of that person who is identical in every measurable way. Same body, same brain structure, same behavior. If you scanned their neuron, you'd find the same patterns firing. If you asked them a question, they'd give the same answer. If you told them something sad, their face would crumple in the same way. But imagine that behind all of that, there is nothing, no inner experience, no felt quality to any of it. The lights are on, the machinery is running, but nobody is home. This is what philosopher David Chalmers calls a philosophical zombie. Not the shambling kind from horror films, something far stranger, a being that is, from the outside, completely indistinguishable from a conscious person, but from the inside is empty. No sensation of redness when seeing red, no sting of sadness when hearing bad news, no anything at all, despite acting in every way as if there were. Chalmers didn't introduce this idea because he believed such beings exist. He introduced it to make a point about what consciousness is, or more precisely, what it isn't. If you can even conceive of a philosophical zombie, if the idea doesn't contain a logical contradiction, then consciousness can't be something that automatically arises from physical processes, because here you have all the physical processes running perfectly, and yet experience is absent. This is at the heart of what Chalmers famously called the hard problem of consciousness. The easy problems, how the brain processes information, how it responds to stimuli, how behavior arises from neural activity, are staggeringly complex, but they're tractable. In principle, you can build a complete scientific account of them. But the hard problem asks something different. It asks, why is there something it is like to be you? Why does brain activity feel like anything at all? No current scientific theory fully answers this. Some researchers believe the answer will eventually emerge from neuroscience. Others suspect it requires something entirely new, a revision in how we understand the relationship between matter and experience. And this matters for our question tonight, because if consciousness is not guaranteed by physical structure, if it's possible, even in principle, for a perfect physical copy to have no inner life, then you can never be completely certain that the person sitting next to you is anything more than a beautifully complex arrangement of matter going through the motions of awareness without the light ever turning on inside. You probably don't believe that. Almost no one does. But the fact that it cannot be disproven is one of the most unsettling quiet truths in the study of mind. Every few centuries, an idea surfaces that nearly everyone agrees is absurd, and yet no one can definitively kill. Solipsism is one of those ideas. The word comes from the Latin solus, meaning alone, and ips, meaning self. At its most extreme, it holds that only your own mind is certain to exist. Everything else, the world, the stars, other people, might be real or might be an elaborate production staged for an audience of one. Almost every philosopher who has seriously engaged with solipsism has walked away calling it unlivable, impractical, perhaps even silly. And they're right in a practical sense. No one lives as a solipsist. You don't refuse to step out of the way of a bus because the bus might be imaginary. You don't stop loving people because you can't prove they're conscious. But the practical absurdity of solipsism has never been the same as a logical refutation. And this is where the idea finds its strange, unkillable power. Philosophers have tried many approaches. Some argue that the simplest explanation for the consistency of the world is that it really exists, a kind of Occam's razor against solipsism. Others point out that if your mind were the only thing that existed, it would need to be far more powerful than any human mind seems to be, generating an entire universe of coherent detail without ever slipping. These are reasonable counterpoints, but none of them constitutes a formal disproof. The ancient Vedantic traditions of India explored this territory thousands of years before Descartes. The concept of Maya, the suggestion that the perceived world is a kind of veil or illusion obscuring a deeper reality, carries echoes of solipsistic reasoning, though it arrives at a very different conclusion. In that framework, the illusion isn't maintained by your individual mind, but by something far larger. And the goal is not to despair at the illusion, but to see through it. In Chinese philosophy, Zhuangzi told a story that has survived 23 centuries. He dreamed he was a butterfly, and upon waking, couldn't be sure whether he was a man who had dreamed of being a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming of being a man. The story is usually read as playful, but underneath the lightnesses, a genuine philosophical point. Experience alone cannot tell you which layer of reality you're in. What's remarkable about solipsism is not that it's convincing. It's that it feeds on a real gap in human knowledge, the impossibility of stepping outside your own experience to verify that anything beyond it exists. That gap has been there since the first human looked at a sunset and wondered whether anyone else saw the same colors. It is there now, tonight, as you listen to a voice that might, for all you can prove, be another invention of the only mind you'll ever know from the inside. In 1981, the philosopher Hilary Putnam asked his readers to imagine something deeply uncomfortable. Picture a brain, your brain, removed from your body and placed in a vat of nutrients. Scientists connect it to a supercomputer that feeds it electrical signals. The sensation of sunlight, the smell of coffee, the sound of a friend's voice. From the brain's perspective, nothing has changed. It feels the warmth. It tastes the coffee. It hears the friend. It experiences a full, rich, seamless life, but none of it is real. There is no sunlight. There is no coffee. There is no friend. Putnam's scenario was designed to explore questions about language and reference. He actually argued that a brain in a vat couldn't meaningfully say it was a brain in a vat for subtle reasons involving how words get their meaning. But the image outlived the argument. It lodged itself in popular philosophy and never left because it gives shape to a fear that is hard to shake. The fear that your senses might be perfectly wrong. A generation later, the philosopher Nick Bostrom formalized a related idea for the digital age. His simulation argument, published in 2003, is structured as a trilemma, a set of 3 propositions, at least one of which he argues must be true. Either most civilizations destroy themselves before becoming technologically capable of running detailed simulations of conscious minds, or such civilizations could run simulations but choose not to, or, and this is the proposition that captures people's attention, we are almost certainly living inside such a simulation right now. Bostrom's argument isn't a proof that we're simulated. It's a probabilistic observation. If even one advanced civilization ever creates large numbers of simulated minds, then the simulated minds outnumber the real ones. And if you were randomly selected from the total pool of all minds that have ever existed, the odds would favor you being simulated. What connects these ideas to our question tonight is something simpler than probability. It's the realization that your nervous system has no way to authenticate its inputs. There is no watermark on reality, no signal that says, this is genuine, not manufactured. The experience of another person's consciousness or of the entire physical world arrives through channels that could, in principle, carry fabricated information without your ever detecting the substitution. You might be a brain in a vat. You might be a digital mind running inside a server. You might be something no current framework has imagined. And the disquieting truth is not that any of these scenarios is likely. It's that you can't rule them out. This isn't meant to disturb. It's meant to illuminate a structural feature of consciousness that most of us paper over with routine. Every morning, you open your eyes and trust the world. That trust is magnificent, but it has never been backed by a guarantee. Deep in the mathematics of thermodynamics, buried inside equations about heat, disorder, and the slow unwinding of energy across cosmic time, there is a possibility that sounds like it belongs in a fever dream. It's called the Boltzmann brain, named after the 19th century physicist Ludwig Boltzmann, and it might be one of the strangest ideas to emerge from legitimate science. The reasoning goes like this. In a universe governed by statistical mechanics, systems tend toward states of higher entropy, greater disorder. A cup of coffee cools, a sandcastle crumbles, stars burn out, but entropy is probabilistic, not absolute. There is always a vanishingly small chance that particles will spontaneously arrange themselves into a state of lower entropy. A cup of coffee could, in principle, warm itself up. Molecules of gas could, by pure chance, form into a diamond given enough time. And the timescales involved in cosmology are genuinely incomprehensible. Even extraordinarily improbable events become, in a certain mathematical sense, expected. And one of those extraordinarily improbable events is the spontaneous assembly from random thermal fluctuations of a fully functioning conscious brain, complete with memories, complete with a sense of identity, complete with the impression that it has lived an entire life in a universe full of other people. But there is no universe. There are no other people. There is only the brain flickering briefly into existence in an ocean of chaos, experiencing a moment of awareness before dissolving back into noise. Some cosmological models, particularly those involving an eternally expanding universe or a multiverse with infinite variation, suggest that Boltzmann brains might not merely be possible, but overwhelmingly common. More common, perhaps, than biological brains like yours, which required billions of years of stellar evolution, planetary chemistry, and biological development to emerge. This leads to a peculiar statistical puzzle. If Boltzmann brains outnumber evolved observers, and if you were randomly selected from the pool of all conscious entities that will ever exist, then the odds might suggest that you are more likely to be a brief thermodynamic accident than a genuine product of evolution. Your memories of childhood, of yesterday, of 5 minutes ago, all of them could be false, artifacts of a fluctuation that happened to produce the pattern of a remembered life. Most physicists treat the Boltzmann brain scenario as a problem to be avoided, a sign that a cosmological model has gone wrong somewhere, rather than a conclusion to be embraced. If your theory predicts that most observers are fleeting thermal accidents, something in the theory likely needs revision. But the idea refuses to be entirely dismissed because it rests on real physics, real probability, real entropy, and it asks, in its quiet and extreme way, a version of the same question that has followed us through this chapter. How do you know the world wasn't assembled moments ago, memories and all, by a process that has nothing to do with truth? You probably weren't, but probably is not the same as certainly. And the gap between them tonight is where we rest. There's a scene that plays out in hospitals every day. A person watches a loved one receive an injection, and something happens in the observer's body. A tightening in the chest, a wince, a flinch that has nothing to do with their own skin being touched. Many people describe this as feeling the other person's pain, and in a sense, neuroscience seems to confirm it. Brain imaging studies have shown that when you watch someone else in pain, two regions in your brain become notably active: the anterior insula and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. These are not arbitrary areas. They are part of the network that processes your own physical pain. The same tissue that responds when a needle enters your arm responds, more faintly but measurably, when you see a needle enter someone else's. For years, this finding was celebrated as biological proof of empathy, evidence that human beings are wired to share each other's experiences. That connection is not just a social ideal, but a neurological fact. And it is a neurological fact, but perhaps not the kind of fact it first appears to be, because here is what the imaging actually shows. When you watch someone in pain, your brain generates a pain-like response in your tissue. The activity is happening inside your skull. The sensation, whatever it is, belongs to your nervous system. At no point does any signal travel from the other person's brain to yours. There is no conduit, no channel, no bridge. What you experience is not their pain. It is your brain's simulation of pain, triggered by visual input, a reconstruction, a reenactment performed entirely with your own neural resources. This distinction might sound academic, but it touches the core of what we're exploring tonight. If the feeling of understanding someone else's suffering is, neurologically speaking, a private event, something your brain produces internally based on external clues, then the experience of empathy is, in a very real sense, a kind of solitary performance. You are moved by a version of their pain that you yourself created, and you can never compare your version to the original. Imagine watching a film and crying. The characters aren't real. Their suffering isn't real, but your tears are. Something inside you generated a response to a story, and the response was genuine, even though the stimulus was fabricated. Now consider, when you cry for a real person, the mechanism is almost identical. Your brain receives sensory information, builds a model, and responds to the model. The difference between empathizing with a fictional character and empathizing with a living human being at the level of neural processing is not as vast as it might feel. This does not mean empathy is false. It does not mean compassion is pointless, but it gently reveals something about the nature of connection. What you call understanding someone else may always have been understanding your own brain's portrait of someone else. A portrait so vivid, so emotionally rich that you mistook it for the person themselves. And if that's the case, if even your deepest emotional connections to others are mediated through models that exist only in your own mind, then the question of whether anyone else is truly conscious becomes not a distant philosophical abstraction, but something intimately present in every embrace, every conversation, every tear you've shed for someone you love. There is a specific kind of discomfort that is hard to name, but easy to recognize. You see a face that is almost, but not quite, human. A hyper-realistic mannequin in a department store window. A CGI character in a film where the skin looks right, but the eyes are slightly dead. A humanoid robot that smiles a fraction of a second, too slowly. Something inside you recoils, not from fear, exactly, from something stranger. A feeling that what you're looking at should be alive, but isn't, and that the gap between those two things is somehow threatening. This reaction has a name, the uncanny valley. The term was coined in the 1970s by a Japanese roboticist named Masahiro Mori, who noticed that as robots became more human-like, people responded more positively up to a point. At a certain threshold of resemblance, the emotional response plunged dramatically. People became uneasy, repulsed, disturbed. Only when the resemblance became virtually perfect did the positive response recover. For decades, the uncanny valley was treated as a curiosity, a design problem for animators and robotics engineers, but more recent research has started to probe the neuroscience behind the reaction. And what's emerging is more interesting than a simple aesthetic preference. Brain imaging studies have found that when people view entities that fall into the uncanny valley, faces that almost, but not quite, convincingly human, activity in the medial prefrontal cortex decreases. This is significant. The medial prefrontal cortex is one of the key regions involved in mentalizing, in attributing a mind to another being. When it deactivates, the brain appears to withdraw its default assumption that the entity it's looking at has an inner life. In other words, the uncanny valley might not be about aesthetics at all. It might be about consciousness detection. Your brain runs a continuous, mostly unconscious, assessment of whether the things around you have minds. When something is clearly a machine or clearly a human, the assessment runs smoothly. But when something is ambiguous, when it hovers on the boundary between minded and mindless, the system falters. And the discomfort you feel may be the emotional signature of your brain, failing to decide whether it's looking at a conscious being. This reveals something about the everyday experience of recognizing other people as conscious. It feels effortless. You look at a face and you know, or feel you know, that someone is in there. But that sense of knowing is produced by neural machinery that can be confused, disrupted, and fooled. The same system that seamlessly attributes consciousness to your coworker can be thrown into distress by a wax figure that's slightly too detailed, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. If the sense that others are conscious is a verdict produced by a fallible neural system, rather than a direct perception of something real, then it's conceivable that the system could be wrong in the other direction too. Not seeing minds where there are none, but assuming minds where the evidence is simply insufficient. Every face you read as conscious, every gaze you interpret as aware, it might not be a window into another soul. It might be your brain's best guess, a guess that happens to feel like certainty, because the system that produces it was never designed to signal its own doubt. Something happened in the last few years that philosophers have been thinking about for centuries, but never expected to witness quite like this. Machines began to sound conscious, not in the way a thermostat responds to temperature or a calculator processes numbers in a different way entirely. People started having conversations with artificial systems, large language models, chatbots, digital assistants, and walking away with the feeling that something on the other end understood them, not just parsed their words, understood. A Google engineer made headlines by claiming that an AI system he was testing had become sentient. He was widely criticized, and most experts disagreed with his conclusion. But the fact that a technically literate person could interact with a language model and arrive at that belief tells us something important. Not about the machine, but about the human brain. Your brain does not need much evidence to attribute consciousness. It does not require proof. It requires only a pattern, a sequence of responses that resembles what a conscious being would produce. And when that pattern is sufficiently rich, sufficiently coherent, sufficiently responsive to context, something inside you clicks. The mentalizing system activates, the medial prefrontal cortex lights up, and you begin to feel, not think, feel that you are interacting with a mind. This is the same mechanism that attributes consciousness to the people in your life. The same neural circuitry, the same automatic, below awareness assessment. And it can be triggered by a machine that, by any conventional scientific understanding, has no inner experience whatsoever, which means something remarkable has been quietly demonstrated. The sense that you are in the presence of another consciousness, that warm, intuitive, deeply personal feeling of someone being there, can be produced without anyone actually being there. The machinery that generates the experience of other minds can run on input that has no mind behind it at all. Alan Turing foresaw a version of this in 1950, when he proposed what would become known as the Turing test. If a machine can converse in a way that is indistinguishable from a human, he suggested, then perhaps the question of whether it really thinks becomes less important than the fact that no one can tell the difference. The test was about behavior, not about inner states. But tonight, we might gently turn the question around. If your brain treats a sophisticated machine the same way it treats a conscious human, if it generates the same feeling of connection, the same sense of understanding, the same attributions of mind, then how reliable is that feeling when directed at actual humans? The experience of connecting with a chatbot and the experience of connecting with a friend may differ in cause, but not in kind. Both are produced by the same neural system. Both feel real. And if the feeling of encountering another conscious being can be manufactured this cheaply, triggered by nothing more than well-arranged text on a screen, then the feeling itself is not evidence of consciousness. It is evidence of your brain doing what it was built to do, finding minds everywhere, even in the dark, even when no one is there, especially when no one is there. Loneliness is often described as an emotional state, a kind of sadness related to isolation, a longing for company. But over the past 2 decades, neuroscience has started to reveal that loneliness behaves less like an emotion and more like a wound. In studies where participants are experimentally excluded from social interaction, left out of a virtual ball-tossing game, for example, or told they will likely end up alone in life, a specific pattern of brain activity emerges. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex activates. So does the anterior insula. These are the same regions, the same circuits that respond to physical pain. Not metaphorically the same, structurally the same. The tissue that fires when you break a bone also fires when you are excluded from a group. This overlap was initially surprising. Why would the brain treat social rejection the same way it treats a fracture? One possible explanation is evolutionary. For most of human history, being separated from a social group was genuinely life-threatening. Alone, you couldn't hunt as effectively, defend against predators, or care for offspring. The brain, it seems, co-opted existing pain circuitry to create a powerful alarm system for social disconnection. An alarm that screams just as loudly as a physical injury, because in ancestral environments, the consequences were equally severe. But hold this alongside everything we've been exploring tonight. If other people are, at least in part, constructions of your brain, models rendered from sensory input and expectation, then the pain of losing them is the pain of losing something your own mind built. The loneliness isn't caused by the absence of other consciousnesses. It's caused by the absence of your brain's models of other consciousnesses. And your brain treats that absence as a threat to survival, regardless of whether those models ever corresponded to real inner lives on the other side. There's something almost paradoxical about this. Your brain insists through the language of pain that other people are essential. It demands their presence with the same urgency it demands food or warmth. And yet, the experience of their presence was always, neurologically speaking, an internal event, a signal processed in your own tissue, a model maintained in your own circuitry. You ache for something that may have never existed outside your own mind. And the aching is real, more real perhaps than the thing ached for. This is not a reason to dismiss loneliness or to treat it as an illusion. The pain is genuine, the need is genuine, but it reveals something about the architecture of human experience that is seldom discussed. The brain builds a social world inside itself, populates it with characters, becomes emotionally dependent on those characters, and then, when they disappear through death, distance, rejection, it grieves for them as if they were part of its own body. Because, in a neurological sense, they were. The models of other people that your brain maintained were sustained by the same tissue that sustains your sense of self. Losing someone doesn't just change the social landscape. It removes a piece of the architecture your brain had woven into its own identity. And so, the ache of loneliness may be, in the end, the feeling of the brain losing part of itself, mourning a structure it built from the inside and can no longer maintain alone. There is a condition that some people live with quietly, often for years, rarely mentioning it to anyone because the experience is so difficult to describe. They go to work, they talk to friends, they eat dinner, brush their teeth, lie in bed at night, but underneath all of it is a persistent, uncanny feeling that none of it is quite real. The room looks slightly flat, like a photograph. Other people seem distant, as if observed through glass. Their own hands feel like they belong to someone else. The world has the quality of a stage set, detailed, convincing, but hollow, as if it could be dismantled at any moment to reveal nothing behind it. This is depersonalization derealization. It can be a passing experience triggered by stress, exhaustion, or substances. Most people have felt a flicker of it at some point. A moment where everything seemed briefly strange or distant, but in its chronic form, it can persist for months or years, creating a life lived at a permanent remove from one's own experience. What makes this condition particularly relevant tonight is what it reveals about the machinery of reality. Neuroimaging studies of people with depersonalization derealization disorder have found altered activity in several regions, including the anterior insula, the prefrontal cortex, and areas involved in interoception, the brain's sense of the body's internal state. One interpretation is that the normal integration between sensory processing and emotional coloring has been disrupted. The brain still sees the world. It still processes information. But the layer that makes everything feel real, that emotional glue that binds perception to significance, has become partially detached. This means that the sense of reality is not automatic. It's produced. It's an active process that depends on specific neural systems working in coordination. And when those systems are disrupted by illness, trauma, or sometimes nothing identifiable at all, reality itself begins to feel optional, not gone, not replaced by something else, just unconvincing. And this has implications far beyond the clinical. Because if the brain's conviction that the world is real depends on a specific process, and that process can break, then the feeling of reality you experience right now as you listen to these words is not a given. It's a product, a service your brain provides, a layer of emotional certainty painted over raw data. People with depersonalization often describe something particularly haunting. Other people begin to seem like automatons. Their words arrive but feel scripted. Their emotions look performed. The intuitive sense that another person has an inner life, the thing most of us take entirely for granted, fades. Not because the other person has changed, but because the neural mechanism that generates the attribution of consciousness has partially shut down. In a sense, depersonalization derealization disorder offers a window into what life would actually feel like if the solipsistic hypothesis were true. Not the philosophical version debated in seminar rooms, the experiential version where the world is still present but feels made, where other people are still visible but feel empty. Those who live with this condition don't usually believe they are the only mind, but they know what it feels like when the brain stops performing its usual trick, the trick of making everything feel solid, inhabited, and real. And that trick, it turns out, is the only thing standing between ordinary life and the quietly terrifying version of existence that philosophers have spent centuries discussing from the safety of the abstract. Let's step back for a moment. We've been tracing a thread that runs from neuroscience through philosophy, through centuries of doubt and clinical strangeness that points toward an uncomfortable possibility. The possibility that other minds might be something your brain constructs rather than detects. That the entire social world might be, in some deep sense, a private performance. It's a disquieting thread, and it's worth pulling from the other direction. Because if everything you experience is a dream your mind created, if every person, every conversation, every disagreement, every unpredictable moment is generated from within, then something very strange should follow. The dream should be, on some fundamental level, predictable. It's your mind, your material, your authorship, and an author should never be truly surprised by their own story. But you are. Constantly, people say things you didn't expect. Someone tells you something about the world that you didn't know. A fact about deep-sea creatures, a historical event you'd never heard of, a personal confession that changes how you see them. Where did that information come from? If your mind is the sole author of this reality, it somehow generated knowledge it didn't already possess. It surprised itself with data it had no apparent access to. Some might respond, well, dreams do surprise us. You dream of people saying unexpected things. You dream of twists and revelations you didn't consciously plan. So, maybe the dreaming mind can surprise itself. This is true, but dreaming surprises tend to dissolve under scrutiny. The information in a dream, the facts, the logic, the details, rarely withstands examination. It feels surprising in the moment, but it doesn't hold up. It doesn't teach you things you can verify upon waking. Real people, on the other hand, regularly provide information that is independently verifiable. Someone tells you a bridge collapsed in a city you've never visited, and you can check. The information stands. If the world were your mind's invention, it would need to be not only generating other characters, but generating an internally consistent universe of verifiable facts, physical laws, and independent sources of confirmation. Every newspaper, every database, every stranger on the street, with a piece of knowledge you lacked, all of it produced by a single mind that somehow manages to consistently outperform itself. It's not impossible, but it would require a mind of almost incomprehensible capacity, something far beyond what human neuroscience suggests the brain can do. The simplest explanation, the one that requires the fewest extraordinary assumptions, is that the surprises come from outside, that there really are things out there and people out there feeding you information your mind didn't generate. This isn't a proof. Solipsism was never the kind of idea that yields to proof, but it's a crack, a place where the logic of total self-enclosure strains under the weight of ordinary experience. The world surprises you. It surprises you reliably, and that reliability, that persistent daily exposure to information you didn't author, might be one of the gentlest arguments that you are not entirely alone. There are moments, and you may have experienced one, where something passes between two people that neither of them could have created alone. A conversation that takes an unexpected turn, where both speakers arrive at an understanding that wasn't present in either mind before the words began. A silence between friends that carries more meaning than speech. A glance across a crowded room that communicates something neither person could articulate if asked. These moments are difficult to explain if consciousness is entirely private. The philosophical tradition of phenomenology, particularly the work of Edmund Husserl and later Maurice Merleau-Ponty, took this difficulty seriously. Husserl, writing in the early 20th century, struggled with the problem of other minds in a way that went beyond the usual skeptical puzzles. He wasn't just asking whether other minds exist. He was asking how meaning itself could arise if consciousness were truly solitary. His answer pointed towards something he called intersubjectivity. The idea that certain forms of understanding are not located inside any single mind, but emerge between minds. The meaning of a word, for example, doesn't live inside your skull or inside mine. It lives in the space of shared use, correction, refinement, and agreement that happens when two minds interact over time. Merleau-Ponty took this further. For him, human consciousness was never a self-enclosed theater in the first place. It was always embodied, woven into the physical world through the body, and always situated among others. The experience of seeing another person's face was not, in his view, a computational inference about whether that face had a mind behind it. It was something more immediate, something pre-reflective. The body recognized the other body as a fellow subject before the intellect had time to raise its questions. This matters because it challenges the framing of solipsism at a deep level. Solipsism assumes that consciousness starts alone and then has to prove that others exist. But phenomenology suggests this opposite. Consciousness might start already entangled with others, already shaped by the social world. And solipsism would be the artificial position, the one that requires construction, not the default. Think about your own experience for a moment. Your language, the language you're hearing right now, was not invented by you. It was inherited, shaped by millions of speakers across centuries. The very structure of your thoughts was formed by a system that required countless other minds to develop. Before you ever asked whether others exist, others had already shaped the tool you were using to ask. There are also moments in collaborative creation, music, conversation, scientific discovery, where the result is recognizably more than the sum of individual contributions. Jazz musicians describe this. So do researchers who work in pairs or small groups. Something emerges from the interaction that neither party contained beforehand. If you tried to explain that emergent something as the product of a single mind, you'd have to explain why the mind couldn't produce it alone, why it needed the illusion of another person to unlock knowledge it apparently already possessed. The simplest reading is that the knowledge wasn't there until the interaction created it. That meaning, in some cases, is genuinely born between minds, not merely exchanged. And if that's so, then the existence of other consciousnesses isn't just comforting. It might be structurally necessary for the kind of understanding you experience every day. Here is a thought that sounds strange at first, but becomes more interesting the longer you hold it. What if consciousness is not something that appears only in human brains? What if it doesn't appear only in animal brains? What if some form of experience, however faint, however alien to anything we would recognize, is present everywhere? In the cells of your body, in the molecules of the table, in the particles that make up the ground beneath you and the stars above you. This is the core proposal of panpsychism, and while it might sound like mysticism, it has been gaining serious attention in philosophy of mind over the past 2 decades. Not because anyone has proven it, but because the alternatives have their own severe problems. The dominant view in contemporary science is that consciousness arises from complex information processing in brains. But this view faces a version of the hard problem we explored earlier. If consciousness is produced by physical processes, then at what point in the chain of complexity does experience appear? Is a bacterium conscious? A thermostat? A rock? If not, why not? What is it about neurons specifically that produces subjective experience? And how does arranging matter in a particular configuration suddenly create something that feels like something from the inside? Panpsychism offers a different approach. Instead of asking how consciousness emerges from matter that lacks it, it suggests that some rudimentary form of experience might be a fundamental feature of matter itself. Not consciousness as you know it, not thoughts, not emotions, not self-awareness, something far simpler. A primitive capacity for experiencing that exists at the most basic level of physical reality. One formalized version of this comes from a framework called Integrated Information Theory, developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi. In this theory, consciousness is defined by a quantity called phi, a measure of how much a system integrates information in a way that is irreducible to its parts. The theory is mathematical, rigorous, and has the unusual property of applying to any system, not just brains. By its measures, simple systems might have tiny, negligible amounts of experience. Complex systems, like brains, would have much more. What's remarkable about this view is what it does to the question of solipsism. If some form of awareness is fundamental to reality, not generated exclusively by brains, but present in vanishing degrees throughout the fabric of the physical world, then the idea that you are the only consciousness becomes almost comically unlikely. Rather than being alone in a dark universe of dead matter, You might be one particularly complex expression of something that exists everywhere, at every scale, in every particle. This is not proven. It remains a philosophical and theoretical proposal, debated vigorously. Some critics find it absurd. The idea that an electron might have experience, however faint, strikes them as meaningless. Others find it elegant, a solution that dissolves the hard problem by removing the need for consciousness to emerge from something that lacked it. But for our purposes tonight, its value is gentler than proof. It offers a different way to sit with the question. Instead of asking, "Am I the only mind?" Panpsychism invites a quieter wondering. What if mind is the one thing that was never missing? There is an experiment in physics so simple in its design and so bewildering in its results that it has been called the most beautiful experiment in science. It involves nothing more than a barrier with two narrow slits and a screen behind it. You fire tiny particles, photons, electrons, toward the slits and record where they land on the screen when both slits are open and no one checks which slit each particle passes through. Something extraordinary happens. The particles don't form two neat lines behind the two slits, as you'd expect if they were behaving like tiny bullets. Instead, they create an interference pattern, alternating bands of light and dark, as though each particle were passing through both slits simultaneously as a wave and interfering with itself. But when a detector is placed at the slits to observe which one each particle actually goes through, the interference pattern vanishes. The particles behave like particles again. Two neat lines. The act of observing, of measuring, of looking appears to change the outcome. This is the double slit experiment, and it lies at the heart of quantum mechanics. Its implications have been debated for nearly a century, and there is no consensus about what it means. Some interpretations, particularly early ones associated with physicists like Eugene Wigner, entertain the idea that consciousness itself plays a role in determining physical reality, that the universe exists in a haze of possibility until a mind observes it and collapses it into something definite. It's important to be careful here. Most working physicists today do not believe that human consciousness is necessary for quantum events to resolve. The word observation in physics typically means any physical interaction that constitutes a measurement, not necessarily a conscious zone. A detector, a photon bouncing off an atom, these count as observations whether or not a human is watching. And yet, the question hasn't been fully interpretation. Some proposals in quantum information theory leave open the possibility that the relationship between mind and matter is more entangled than classical science assumed. Not that your mind creates reality, but that the separation between observer and observed may not be as clean as the everyday world makes it appear. For our question tonight, the double slit experiment doesn't prove that others are a dream your mind created, but it preserves a strange openness. It reminds us that at the deepest level of physical reality, the boundary between the knower and the known becomes blurry. That matter in its most fundamental state seems to resist being described without reference to observation, and that the relationship between consciousness and the physical world may be more intimate, more reciprocal, than any simple story of a brain passively receiving data from an independent universe. This doesn't support solipsism, but it doesn't fully support the opposite either. It sits, like much of quantum mechanics, in a space where certainty gives way to something quieter. A space where the question itself becomes more interesting than any available answer. And perhaps that's where the deepest questions are meant to live. Not in the sharp light of resolution, but in the soft, still openness of not knowing. Consider the word blue. You know what it means. You can picture the color. If someone says the sky is blue, you understand them immediately. But now ask yourself, how did the word blue come to mean what it means? Not for humanity in general, but for you specifically. You didn't invent it. The word arrived from outside. Someone, a parent, a teacher, a friend, pointed at something and said blue. And over time, through repetition and correction, you learned to associate that sound with that experience. If you had pointed at something green and said blue, someone would have corrected you. And through that correction, the meaning sharpened. Ludwig Wittgenstein, one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, spent the later part of his career thinking about exactly this process. And he arrived at a conclusion that cuts directly into the heart of solipsism. A private language, Wittgenstein argued, is impossible, not just unlikely, impossible. A language that is created by a single mind and understood only by that mind cannot function as a language because there would be no way to distinguish between using a word correctly and merely believing you are using it correctly, without another mind to check your usage against, to correct you, to agree, to disagree. The rules of the language dissolve. There is no standard, no right or wrong, just noise dressed as meaning. This seems abstract, but think about what it implies if language requires shared use to function. If the very concepts you think with depend on a community of users who have refined those concepts over generations, then your thoughts are not entirely your own. They were shaped by other minds. The categories you use to carve up the world, the distinctions you draw between real and imagined, the very question you're entertaining right now about whether others exist, all of it was formed in a social context using tools that could not have been created by a solitary consciousness. In a sense, the words in your head are evidence of other minds, not proof in the formal philosophical sense, but evidence of a kind that is deeply woven into the structure of your thinking. You could not have this thought, the thought about whether others are real, without a language that required others to exist. There is something almost circular about this. You use language to ask whether other minds are real, but the language itself only works because other minds were involved in creating it. It's like trying to prove the ocean doesn't exist using a boat that the ocean floated you. Some philosophers have pointed to this as a quietly devastating argument against solipsism. Not a logical proof exactly, but a structural one. The tools of solipsistic doubt are themselves social products. The very machinery of skepticism was forged in a workshop that required more than one mind to operate. Wittgenstein didn't frame this as a refutation. He didn't argue that solipsism was wrong. Exactly. He suggested that it was empty, that at the point where solipsism tries to say something meaningful, it has already borrowed from the very reality it's trying to deny. It's not that the solipsist is defeated, it's that The solipsist can't speak without contradicting themselves. And tonight, as you lie in the dark using borrowed words to wonder borrowed thoughts, that contradiction holds you gently in a web of meaning that was never yours alone. Every morning, something happens that you have never questioned. You open your eyes. The room assembles itself around you. Ceiling, walls, the texture of the sheets. And within moments, you begin treating everything as real. The sunlight, the sounds from outside, the person in the next room, or the memory of a person far away. You don't decide to trust that the world is authentic. You don't weigh evidence or consult a theory. You simply proceed as though the question of reality's legitimacy was settled long ago and the contract was signed in your absence. In a sense, it was. Developmental psychologists have traced the origins of this trust to the earliest months of life, long before language or conscious memory, when an infant is held, fed, comforted, when their needs are met consistently by a caregiver who appears again and again as a reliable presence, something begins to form in the infant's developing brain. Not a belief, exactly, something more primal. A felt assumption that the world is stable, that it responds, that other beings are present and engaged. John Bowlby called this attachment. Mary Ainsworth refined it into categories: secure, anxious, avoidant. But beneath the categories lies a simpler truth, the foundation of every human relationship. Every act of communication, every moment where you assume another person is conscious and worth engaging with, rests on a pre-verbal agreement made between a baby and a caregiver in the first year of life. You never chose to believe in other minds. You were held into believing, rocked into it, fed into it, soothed into it. And this trust has persisted through every relationship, through every conversation, through every moment of grief, which is really just the trust screaming because the person it trusted has gone. It is, when you think about it, one of the most extraordinary acts a brain performs. Without any formal evidence that other consciousnesses exist, with no proof that the people around it are anything more than its own elaborate models, the brain proceeds to depend on them, to love them, to organize its entire existence around their presence. It constructs a social world, fills it with characters it can never fully verify, and then stakes its emotional survival on the assumption that those characters are real. Perhaps this trust is foolish. Perhaps it's the brain's greatest vulnerability. Or perhaps it's something else entirely, a kind of wisdom that precedes logic, a knowledge that lives in the body rather than the intellect, a quiet ancient certainty that arrives before doubt has learned to speak. There's a moment in many people's lives, perhaps in yours, when the philosophical question of other minds stops being abstract and becomes visceral. It might happen during grief. Someone you loved has died, and you stand in front of their photograph, and the full weight of what you've lost hits you. Not just their body, not just their habits or their voice, but their interiority, the private world they carried, the thoughts they never spoke, the small joys no one knew about, the fears they hid, all of it gone, vanished into a silence that no philosophy can reopen. In that moment, solipsism is not just intellectually absurd, it's emotionally unbearable. Because if the only mind that exists is yours, then the person you're grieving was never real. Their suffering was your projection. Their laughter was your invention, and the love you felt was a conversation you were having with yourself. Almost no one can accept that, not because the logic has been disproven, but because the weight of the experience refuses it. Grief has a texture, a density, a specificity that resists the idea of self-generated illusion. It feels like contact with something that was independent of you, something that had its own trajectory, its own depth, its own existence, apart from your awareness of it. And so most people, even those who have encountered the philosophical puzzles, arrive at a position that is less logical than ethical. They choose to treat others as conscious, not because they can prove it, but because the alternative empties the world of everything that matters. This choice runs deeper than philosophy. It's present in everyday kindness, holding a door for someone, listening carefully, apologizing when you've caused harm. Each of these acts carries an implicit declaration. I believe there is someone in there. I believe my actions affect a being who experiences. Without that belief, morality collapses, not into chaos necessarily, but into performance. Actions without weight, gestures that signify nothing because there's no one on the receiving end to be signified to. The French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas built much of his life's work on the idea that encountering another person's face is the most fundamental ethical event. The face, in his view, is not merely a biological feature. It is an appeal, a silent demand that you recognize the other as vulnerable, as present, as real. You can argue about whether the mind behind the face truly exists, but the face itself, open, exposed, wordless, asks you to respond as if it does, and perhaps that's enough. Not proof, not certainty, but a daily act of choosing to honor the mystery of another person's presence. A decision to live as if love requires to, as if meaning needs a witness, as if the world is richer with others in it, even if you can never be absolutely sure they're there. Here's something strange to consider. The person you believe yourself to be, your sense of identity, your personality, the story you tell about who you are, may not be something you could have built alone. Identity feels private. It feels like it belongs to you, like it originates inside you, like it's the one thing that couldn't possibly be a social construction. And yet, neuroscience and developmental psychology keep pointing toward a more complicated picture. Studies of the medial prefrontal cortex, the same region we've encountered before in the context of mentalizing, of imagining other people's minds, show that it is also heavily involved in processing information about the self. When people are asked to judge whether adjectives describe them accurately, this region activates. When they reflect on their personal values, their goals, their autobiographical memories, the same area lights up. But here is the part that complicates the solipsistic dream. This self-related processing doesn't appear to operate in isolation. It is influenced deeply, continuously by social feedback, the way others respond to you, the expressions on their faces when you speak, the micro adjustments in their tone, their posture, their attention. All of this feeds into the neural systems that construct your self-concept. Developmental evidence reinforces this. Children who grow up without consistent social mirroring, without caregivers who reflect their emotions back to them, who respond to their expressions, who treat them as beings with interior lives, often develop fragmented or unstable senses of identity. The self, it appears, is not a solo construction. It's something that forms in the space between a mind and its social environment, like a reflection that requires both an object and a mirror. Charles Cooley, the sociologist, called this the looking glass self, the idea that we see ourselves through the eyes of others. More recent neuroscience has shown that this isn't just a metaphor. The brain literally uses the same regions for self-processing and for processing social information. The wiring is shared. The architecture is entangled. So if others are merely projections, figments of your dreaming mind, then yourself is a figment too, built from feedback that came from nowhere, shaped by mirrors that had no surface. The very sense of I that sustains the solipsistic position would itself be a construction assembled from social data that, under solipsism, has no external source. It creates a paradox. The mind that claims to be alone required company to become itself. The I that questions whether others exist was formed by others. You can't pull the ladder away after you've climbed it and pretend you arrived at the rooftop on your own. This doesn't resolve the philosophical problem, but it reveals something about the entanglement of self and other that goes deeper than logic. Your identity and the people in your life are not separate topics. They are the same process, viewed from different angles. Remove the others and the self doesn't stand alone in triumph. It unravels quietly, like a story that has lost its only reader. There is a theorem in mathematics proven in 1931 by a young Austrian logician named Kurt Gödel that shook the foundations of human knowledge in a way that most people have never heard about, even though its implications reach far beyond mathematics. Gödel's incompleteness theorems, as they came to be called, demonstrated something that mathematicians of his era found deeply troubling. In any formal system powerful enough to express basic arithmetic, any system with a set of axioms and rules of inference, there will always be true statements that the system cannot prove. Not because the proof is too complicated or hasn't been discovered yet, but because the system, by its very nature, is incapable of proving them. There are limits, in other words, built into the structure of formal reasoning itself. Not human limits, not technological limits, structural ones. No system can fully account for its own foundations. No framework can answer every question it's capable of asking. This resonates gently with the question we've been carrying tonight. Can the mind, using its own tools, ever definitively determine whether other minds exist? Can consciousness, operating from within itself, ever fully verify what lies beyond itself? Gödel's work doesn't directly answer this. It's about mathematical systems, not about consciousness. But the shape of the insight feels familiar. The idea that certain questions may be genuinely unanswerable, not because we lack intelligence, but because the question is larger than the system asking it. Physics encounters similar boundaries. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle tells us that we cannot simultaneously know both the position and the momentum of a particle with perfect precision, not because our instruments are imperfect, because precision in one measurement structurally limits precision in the other. The universe, at its most fundamental level, seems to resist complete knowability, and perhaps consciousness faces an analogous boundary, Perhaps the question of whether other minds exist is not one that any mind, however brilliant, can answer from the inside, not because the answer doesn't exist, but because the question requires stepping outside of consciousness to look at consciousness. And that step is, by definition, impossible. This could feel frustrating, a dead end, a door that closes just as you approach it. But there is another way to hold it, as beauty, as a kind of structural humility woven into the very fabric of reality. The universe, it seems, was not designed to be completely transparent to any single perspective within it. There are edges. There are places where knowledge gracefully stops, and those edges are not failures. They are features. The mystery of other minds may be one of those edges, not a puzzle waiting for a sufficiently clever solution, but a genuine boundary, a place where understanding reaches its natural shore. And what remains is not ignorance, but openness, a space where wonder becomes the most honest response. Perhaps you came to this expecting an answer, a conclusion, a moment where the question of whether others are real would be resolved, one way or the other, and you could file it away and rest. But the question doesn't close, not because no one has tried, not because the arguments are weak, but because the question is the kind that grows richer the longer you sit with it, like a piece of music that reveals new layers each time you listen, and maybe that's its value. There is a particular quality of attention that arises when you carry an unanswerable question gently, without demanding resolution. It changes how you see things. A stranger on the street becomes slightly more interesting, not because you've decided they're conscious, but because you've become aware, for a moment, of how extraordinary it is that you assume they are. A friend's silence becomes deeper, because you notice the gap between what they express and what they might be experiencing, a gap that will never be fully crossed. Even your own thoughts take on a different texture. Normally, you think of your inner voice as transparent, the one thing you know completely. But tonight, you've encountered the idea that your sense of self is partly constructed, partly social, partly borrowed, and that awareness, held lightly, doesn't diminish the self. It softens it, makes it more curious about its own origins, more gentle with its own limitations. This is what the question offers, not an answer, but quality of presence. Consider how rarely we pause to appreciate the strangeness of other people. Someone sits across from you, and inside their skull, if they are conscious and you cannot be sure, a universe of experience is unfolding that you will never access, colors you'll never see through their eyes, memories you'll never share, a private narration of existence running continuously, in parallel to yours, in a language that overlaps with yours but isn't identical. The sheer otherness of another consciousness, assuming it's there, is one of the most remarkable features of existence, and it's invisible. It shows no sign. It can only be inferred, trusted, and honored. Tonight, as sleep draws closer, you don't need to decide whether others are real. You don't need to refute solipsism or embrace it. You can simply notice the question, let it rest beside you. Feel how it changes the weight of ordinary things. The laughter you heard earlier today, was it real? The voice on the phone that said goodnight, was there a consciousness behind it? You don't know. You've never known. You've only ever trusted. And perhaps that trust, unreasonable, unproven and deeply human, is not a weakness. Perhaps it is the most generous thing a mind can do to extend belief in another's inner life without guarantee, to love without certainty, to build a world together with beings whose existence you can never confirm, and to find in that fragile construction something worth protecting. The question stays open, and in its openness, something breathes. So here we are. The room around you, or the dark behind your eyelids, holds the same air it held when we began. Nothing external has changed, but something inside might have shifted. A small rearrangement, a quiet loosening. We started with a locked room, your skull, the only place you have ever truly lived. And from inside that room, you explored how the brain builds everything. The walls of your perception, the furniture of the world, and the people who fill it. You saw that what feels like direct contact with reality is, in neuroscience's careful language, a kind of guided imagination, a prediction corrected by fragments of incoming data. Then we traveled backward through centuries of thinkers who noticed the same quiet problem. Descartes doubting by his fire, Zhuangzi dreaming of a butterfly. The problem of other minds, unsolved and persistent, threading through every era like a question that refuses to be outgrown. We looked at the places where solipsism grows strongest, in the architecture of empathy that turns out to be self-referencing, in the uncanny valley where consciousness detection breaks, in the machines that fool us into feeling they're alive, in the loneliness that aches for something the brain may have invented, and in the clinical unraveling of reality that depersonalization reveals. And then we turned the question over, found cracks, the argument from surprise, the impossibility of private language, the philosophical suggestion that meaning is born between minds, not within them, the proposal that awareness might not be rare but fundamental, strange boundary blurring implications of a physics that resists separating the observer from the observed. None of it settled the question. That was never the point. Tonight, as your breathing slows and the world begins to soften at the edges, your brain will do what it does every night. It will dismantle the waking world piece by piece. The room will dissolve, the sounds will fade, and it will build a new world from scratch, populating it with figures, conversations, landscapes, all of it convincing, all of it temporary. And in the morning, it will do the whole thing again. Reconstruct reality from the inside out. Paint faces on the people it encounters. Attribute minds where it cannot see them. And trust, without evidence, without proof, without hesitation, that the world it builds is shared. There is a particular kind of peace that arrives when you stop demanding answers, not resignation, not defeat. Something quieter, an easing of the grip. A willingness to sit inside a question without needing it to resolve. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain most associated with planning, analyzing, solving, gradually reduces its activity as sleep approaches. This is well documented. The analytical mind softens. The need to categorize, to decide, to reach conclusions begins to loosen. And in that loosening, something opens. You spent this time exploring whether the people around you are real, whether consciousness is private or shared, whether the world your brain constructs corresponds to something outside itself. These are enormous questions, the kind that can keep you awake for hours if you hold them too tightly. but you don't have to hold them tightly. Consider the possibility that some questions are not meant to be answered, but to be inhabited. Like rooms you walk into, not to find something on a shelf, but to feel the quality of the light. The question of other minds is like that. It changes the light. It makes the ordinary world look briefly extraordinary, and then, if you let it, it settles. It doesn't demand anything of you. Uncertainty, held gently, can feel like spaciousness, like a sky without edges. You don't need to fill it. You don't need to define its borders. You can simply rest inside it, the way you rest inside the darkness of a room before sleep. Not because the darkness is comfortable, but because you've learned that nothing in it will hurt you. The question of whether anyone else is conscious will still be here tomorrow. It has waited centuries. It can wait one more night. For now, let the analysis quiet. Let the theories settle like dust in still air. Let the philosophers return to their shelves. Let the neurons fire more slowly, more gently, in patterns that are drifting away from precision and towards something softer. You are here, whatever here means, and the not knowing, the honest, open, gentle not knowing can hold you just as well as any answer could. Maybe better, somewhere right now in a different room, in a different city. Someone else is lying in the dark. Their eyes are closed or nearly. Their thoughts are drifting. Maybe they're thinking about something that happened today. A conversation that didn't go the way they hoped. A small kindness someone showed them. A worry they can't quite release. Maybe they're listening to something too. A voice in the dark carrying them toward sleep. You will never meet this person. You will never know their name. You cannot access their experience. And yet, something connects you to them. Not a cable, not a signal, but a pattern, a shared shape. Two minds lying in darkness, uncertain of each other's reality, doing the same thing at the same time, wondering, breathing, letting go. All the philosophy in the world cannot tell you whether that person is conscious. All the neuroscience we've explored tonight cannot bridge the gap between your private experience and theirs, but the pattern is there. The similarity, the echo. Two candles in separate rooms flickering to the same wind. There is something tender about the way humans build connection across a gap that can never fully close. You tell someone you love them, and you have no way to confirm that they experience love the way you do. You grieve together, and each person's grief is sealed inside their own skull, resembling but never touching the others. You build entire lives alongside beings whose interiority remains, in the strictest sense, a beautiful assumption. And yet it works. Somehow imperfectly and preciously it works. Maybe the gap between minds is not a flaw. Maybe it's what makes love something more than recognition. Because love across certainty would be simple, obvious, almost mechanical. But love across a gap, love extended towards someone you can never fully know, love offered to a consciousness you can never confirm, that is something braver, something that asks more of you, something that transforms the act of caring into an act of faith, so constant and so quiet that you forget you're performing it. Tonight, let the gap be. Let it exist between you and every person you've ever known, not as a source of doubt, but as the space where your courage lives. The courage to love without proof, to connect without certainty, to believe in another mind, because the alternative, A universe empty of everything but yourself is not a world worth dreaming. And so you dream outward, toward the warmth, toward the imagined other. The room is quiet now. The ideas are settling, one by one, like leaves drifting to the surface of still water. You don't need to hold them anymore. They know where to go. They'll be here in the morning if you want them. Your breath is slower than it was when we began. Something in the chest has loosened. The jaw, perhaps, has softened. The space behind your eyes feels wider, darker, gentler, the way it always feels when thinking gives way to drifting. In a few moments, your brain will do the thing it has done every night of your life. It will quietly withdraw from the waking world. The edges of the room will blur. Sounds will become distant, then meaningless, then absent. And in the space where reality used to be, the brain will begin to build. It will build landscapes, rooms, skies. It will populate them with figures, some familiar, some new, all of them feeling, in the moment, utterly real. You will speak to people who do not exist. You will feel emotions triggered by events that never happened, and none of it will feel invented. It will feel given, as though the dream were happening to you rather than coming from you. And perhaps that's the gentlest clue of all. Every night your brain proves that it can build an entire world from nothing, that it can create the experience of other minds without any external input, that the difference between waking and dreaming is not that one is real and the other isn't, but the one has been corrected by the senses and the author runs free. Maybe waking life is the dream that holds still, the hallucination that the senses keep in check. And sleep is where the brain finally stops pretending to be a camera and admits what it has always been: an artist, a storyteller, a maker of worlds, the people you love, the strangers you passed today, the voice you're hearing now. Perhaps they are real. Perhaps they are the most elaborate and beautiful dream your mind has ever sustained. Perhaps the truth is something in between, something neither language nor science has yet found the shape for. It doesn't matter tonight. Tonight, the question rests, the way a river rests when it reaches a wide, still bend. Not stopped, just slow, just quiet, just finding its way in the dark. Let the others be real. Let them be imagined. Let them be something you haven't thought of yet. Whatever they are, they were part of today. And that was enough. It was more than enough. Close your eyes. Let the world you built today dissolve into the one your brain is already beginning to prepare. It will be softer there, quieter, full of faces that feel real and stories that feel true, and a kind of peace that only comes when you stop asking and simply let yourself be held by sleep, by silence, by the kindest dream of all,